The March 20, 2018 Board of Directors meeting of JEA will come to order. Ask everyone to rise for a moment of reflection, followed by the pledge to the flag. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. An agenda has been published and circulated. I have a motion for adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second? Thank you, Reverend Newbill. All in favor?
Aye.
Approved. Mr. McElroy, safety briefing?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We start every meeting at JEA with a safety briefing. We are together on the 19th floor of the JEA tower in the event of emergency. Mr. Brost will call 911 security and also be in charge of CPR at the same time. Should we be required to exit the building, we will go down the stairwell to the left of the elevators as we came up, and we will exit out onto the plaza behind the building over towards the Baptist Church. There'll be folks there to direct you. Mike and I will be the last ones out to ensure that everyone exits the building safely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. McElroy. Call on Chief Legal Officer Jody Brooks for our sunshine statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a duly public noticed meeting. There's a quorum present. Minutes will be taken, and we're in the proper posture to move forward.
Thank you very much. Moving on, we'll accept comments from the public. As I call your name, please come to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and limit your remarks to 3 minutes. Mr. Michael Berger? Sorry, your handwriting is as bad as mine. Is it Barger?
Barger.
Barger. Thank you, Mr.
You did
Barger.
better than most. I missed the October meeting. I wasn't even aware that there was a change to the solar policy being discussed. So I'm just here to kind of give a delayed 2 cents.
Can I have your address, Mr. Barger?
Sure, 215 Huguenot Drive, St. John's, Florida, 32259.
Thank you.
My name is Michael Barger. I am the Northeast Florida Sales Director for SCM Power. I'm here to talk about JEA's new distributed generation policy. I sell residential solar for a living. I believe I have sold more rooftop solar than anyone else in Northeast Florida, roughly 300 systems. So my remarks here today are not based on assumptions or theories about what might happen. I have spent thousands of hours interacting face-to-face with JEA customers. Here's what I have learned. While there are many benefits to going solar, for 9 out of 10 homeowners, the decision really comes down to just one question. How much will I be spending each month for solar compared to how much I'm spending for electricity now? Ladies and gentlemen, cutting the net metering credit by 2/3 will kill residential solar within JEA's territory. Now, I understand that you are introducing a rebate for battery storage. So let's talk about batteries. Nearly every homeowner I've met with has asked about battery storage. They love the idea of having backup power during an outage. That's until they learn how much the batteries increase the system cost. Out of the 300 solar installations, do you know how many I've sold? 0. Not a single system. Batteries are just too expensive. Here's a real-world number. Adding battery storage to offset the need for net metering increases the system cost by about 25%. Most solar power systems are financed. Battery storage will typically increase the monthly payment by almost $60 on a typical 15-year loan. Believe me when I tell you that increasing the monthly payment by an extra $60 will kill the residential solar market. Here's the bottom line. Battery storage makes the monthly payment to go solar a lot higher. And reducing the net metering credit by 2/3 makes the savings a lot less. It's a double whammy of higher cost and lower savings. So you can increase the battery rebate to $4,000 or even $6,000. It isn't going to matter. The new program will reduce annual residential solar installations by at least 90%. And most of the rebate money will go to a small number of systems on expensive homes owned by the wealthy. It will make solar ownership more restrictive in Jacksonville, more elitist, and accessible to only the most affluent of your customers, for whom energy backup power will be more of a luxury toy than an economic or environmental investment. Rooftop solar provides benefits to all of JEA's customers in the form of clean air and summer peak load reduction. And if fairly valued, these benefits can greatly outweigh any costs. So if you want to experiment with batteries, that's fine. but please do not eliminate the current retail net metering rate. To do so will kill the rooftop solar industry in Northeast Florida. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barger, and congratulations on finishing right on the dot.
I timed it.
Thomas Bledsoe. Mr. Bledsoe? Morning.
Good morning. My name is Tom Bledsoe. I represent Renewvia Energy Corporation. We're a solar energy company based out of Atlanta, but we do solar installations for commercial installations nationwide, as well as commercial and residential in sub-Saharan Africa. I would reiterate his sentiments, which are very poignant in what we do as well. I mean, really, in a commercial context, the decision to go solar comes down to finances. I mean, only really. I mean, there's a nice warm and fuzzy for customers that want to do something environmentally sound, but it really comes down to math. And the battery backup on a commercial system is X10 of whatever he's speaking of, because the systems are typically much larger. So I would back up what he says. But more importantly, what I'm here to talk about today or inquire about is I've watched the videos extensively and talked to many people at JEA who have been very helpful about the October meeting where there was a residential gentleman who said he had already sold solar on his building, on his residence that he was preparing to build, and he couldn't meet the date and time, and it was going to put him in a precarious position. And he was being spoken to in regards to the fact that he was a residential builder, and I understood that all the conversation at that time was based on residential. My follow-up, I mean, I don't know why it wouldn't have, the same leniency that he was granted till June 30th wouldn't have been given to commercial as well, and so we assumed that it had. I've had a lot of back and forth with multiple people in the JEA family. As I say, they've been very helpful, and many of whom said, well, certainly it goes for both. And then I inquired more. I said, I need to really get this in writing so I can present it to my customers. 3 of whom are in process right now, one of whom we may be done by the March date, but very likely not by the time we get through the permit approval and everything. But ultimately, the answer came back to me that no, it only went for residential, not commercial. And there's some places on the website that speak to that, other places that don't say specifically. So I'm a little confused as to why an extended deadline would be granted for residential and not commercial, and I would ask that to be addressed and for us to be granted the same leniency. The three jobs that we have sold and have under contract now, we can very easily meet the end of June deadline. As I say, one of them's going on right now. We're hoping to meet the March deadline, but it's going to be tight, and we have roofers building the roof at the same time, so there's things that are out of our control. But that's our request, and I appreciate the ability to be able to speak here today and any response to that.
Thank you, Mr. Bledsoe. Can you state your name for the record before you leave the podium?
Thomas Bledsoe,
And your address.
446 3rd Street, Neptune Beach, Florida, 32266.
Thank you. Mr. McElroy, before we move on to the next public speaker, can you comment to the grandfather? I thought the grandfather exemption did extend to our commercial.
Well, the grandfathering, those that are in place at the transition date will grandfather forward. I mean, I think what's being talked about here is the transition date or the change date. And
Correct.
We had a conversation about the residential. We moved the entire date forward. It had been January 1st. We moved to the March 31st or April 1st to give 6 months' time for folks with a notification back in October, 6 month time to finish construction. So these are certainly a couple of transactions that
Well,
either missed that cutoff or whatever. So we're not really aware of the particular details of this one. And
Who's the appropriate person for him to speak to get a definitive answer?
I think we can talk to Carrie Stewart and Vicki Nichols. Yep.
Yeah, I've spoken with her. And
Thank you.
Just, if I can follow up
Go
one
ahead.
second. The October meeting, this gentleman named David Schachter, he was granted an extension to June. So, I mean, I understand that it was originally January, but at that time, he came in and said, I have these things under contract, and the board voted on it and granted him until June. That's all we're asking for, is the same extra 3-4 months or whatever that is. So,
I think it would be fair to look at the facts and then categorize those according to the decisions that have been made, as opposed to try to make policy here.
right.
Thank you.
And if I can, sorry, if I can make one more comment, it's just that Commercial Systems, I mean, there are 40 subs working on this project. I can't control their deadlines, and so we're kind of at the mercy of that. I've been pushing these people as hard as I can to get these things done, and 2 of them, they just didn't fall within the time frame. So
Thank you, Mr. Bledsoe.
we're doing
Appreciate
our
your
best.
comments.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Pierce, Catherine Pierce. Good morning, Ms. Pierce. Would you state your address for the record also?
Yes, I'm 5201 Atlantic Boulevard, Jacksonville.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm here as an individual ratepayer, and I wanted to speak, I really came about the privatization issue, but I wanted to speak briefly about introducing myself. I've been a solar advocate and renewables advocate since the early 1970s, when the scientists started to talk about the importance of emerging global warming and greenhouse gas emissions problems and the need to transition to solar source and to renewable sources. And I've observed that JEA during the last decade or so since I've been living here permanently has been in this discussion about fuel sources and has been willing to step far out and make investments into the area of nuclear fuel sources and has resisted, in my personal opinion, the necessity of moving to more renewables at a rapid rate. And so I'd like to encourage you to take this opportunity of what's going on, the issue that's coming up around the changes in the energy market, to look again and to open your minds and to be more creative and more imaginative in terms of the relationships that JEA as an institution has to the community, to the workers and the people who live day to day here, the citizens and the future of the city. And I also noted in the paper, it was listed that since 2007, electric sales have been flat industry-wide. And I wanted to get you to comment on, or not necessarily right now, but consider what are the factors in that. Is that time up?
It's a 1-minute warning.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, what there's the issue of the downturn in the economy during 2007 and the idea that increasing electric rates haven't brought sales back up until to the present day. And what is the significance of that, as well as other factors in energy markets that may be resulting in people not having money to buy electricity may be a factor that comes into play. So I just hope that in the talks about privatization that you will begin to see, I personally am opposed to the privatization, and I hope that you will look at it in terms of JEA being a company that's rooted, that has its base and its future among the people of the city.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pierce. Appreciate your comments and sentiments. Next on the agenda, comments from Council Liaison, Honorable Matt Schellenberg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to thank you and the board for having the workshop after this meeting, and I look forward to the open discussion and getting information that are pertinent to what you're going through. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman Schellenberg. I note that you're not a member of the special committee of City Council discussing JEA, but have been in attendance nonetheless. Appreciate your attendance at those special committee meetings. I don't see Dr. Gaffney. Did I miss him? Nothing from the mayor's office today. That's fine. The next agenda item is recognition of JEA employees. We do want to recognize some outstanding employees. Unfortunately, I don't know, spring break, better things to do, feed their goldfish. They weren't able to be here today, so we'll recognize them at a future meeting. However, I did want to recognize by proposing a resolution, the former chair, Tom Petway. And I'll read this in and ask for a motion to adopt the resolution. Whereas Thomas Petway III has served as chairman of the board of directors of JEA from November 30, 2015 to March 21, 2017, and chairman pro tem from April 18, 2017 to May 16, 2017, and served as chairman of the Government and Legal Affairs Committee from June 20, 2017 to December 31, 2017, and whereas he also served as a member of the Compensation Committee and the Government and Legal Affairs Committee from November 30, 2015 to December 31, 2017, and a member of the Finance and Audit Committee from November 30, 2015 to June 20, 2017, and whereas the board accomplished major milestones in economic development, solar expansion, and record J.D. Power customer satisfaction scores during his tenure, and whereas his vision and foresight have been invaluable to JEA by doing the right thing for customers, stakeholders, and community, even when it was not the most popular thing, and whereas his focus and calm professionalism helped guide JEA's strengthening of its financial position, thereby assuring its strong bond rating, and whereas the good humor, dedication, high ethical standards, and appreciation for all things JEA by this consummate gentleman and professional will be missed greatly by all of the JEA family. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Board of Directors of JEA that it hereby expresses its deep gratitude and appreciation to Thomas Petway III for his lasting contributions as a member of the Board of Directors of JEA. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much for that. We're on to the consent agenda, Roman numeral 3A in your agenda. Do I hear a motion for adoption of the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Reverend Newbill. All in favor, aye?
Aye. Aye.
Did you need a separate vote on the action items for approval of the minutes, or is it sufficient on the consent? We had that February 14. You highlighted it for me, that's why I'm asking you.
One
It's
motion,
easy to
one-
do if you'd like, but we had a consent adoption.
No, it was approved, one motion, one vote for each of these
Thank you.
items, but as the moved by Ms. Flanagan and seconded by Mr. Newbill, it captured those two action items with the vote.
Thank you. We're on to 3B, strategic discussion. The first item is an annual report on our JSEB program. Mr. McCarthy. A lot of feedback. Who's in charge of that? Mr. McCarthy, good morning.
Good afternoon, good morning, sir.
We're always excited to hear about our support for the small and emerging businesses in our community.
And this is an annual event, and we've got a great report today on our small business program we call JSEB, Jacksonville Small Emerging Business. You'll just hear me refer to it as JSEB. Can we get the slide up?
Oh, I distracted him. I asked him to work on audio.
Is that it? Okay. How we doing?
This
There
is
is
where we get a
a,
little pop-up. We're experiencing
okay.
technical difficulties.
This is an annual report. It's in your board packets. It's an informational item. You can follow along on tab 3B1. There's a report with the high-level data, and then there's a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to take you through. For background, we've been using the JSEB program since 2004. It's a local small business program. Company owners must reside in the 5 counties surrounding area to qualify for the program: Duval, St. John's, Nassau, Baker, or Clay. The program allows for those 3 items in the middle of the slide: sheltered markets. Sheltered markets are when we go out for services where there are sufficient number of JSEBs that can do that work, and we'll limit the bidding in those cases only to JSEB companies. It allows for subcontracting participation goals in other projects. Typically between 5 and 20% is what we'll set, sometime up to 30. And it also allows for RFP evaluation criteria that'll favor JSEB companies. All JEA solicitations are reviewed to determine the most appropriate bidding strategy depending on the type of work and the availability of the JSEB companies. The city manages the certification process for us and them, and so any qualified JSEB company can participate in City of Jacksonville and JEA work. And currently there are 252 companies certified. So we've been using the program for 14 years, which is a pretty long time. There have been 6 ordinance changes throughout the life of the program. The changes, though, have pretty much kept the basic program intact. That is, it's a local, race and gender neutral small business program. The most recent amendment, which was enacted in May of 2017, did have a little more teeth to it. I've highlighted some of the larger changes. The monetary thresholds to qualify for both owner's net worth and annual revenues basically doubled. Used to be just over $600,000 for personal net worth exclusive of your personal residence, and it went from $6 million to $12 million in annual revenues, which are averaged over 3 years. It established a 7-member JSEB monitoring committee made up of 2 JSEB companies, 2 non-JSEB companies, 2 private citizens, and 1 member from a local trade association, and they'll have reporting requirements out to the mayor and city council. I don't think they've set up quite yet, but I think they're pretty close. It added continuing education and mentoring programs with support from FCJ and Edward Waters. And it also restarted the number of years in the program for current certified JSEB companies. The actual number of years you can be in the program actually went down from 14 to 9, but it restarted current JSEB companies, so they're at 0 now. So it'll be 9 years before somebody times out of the program. This chart we show each year, and it reports out on the high-level metric for the program. The goal for the JSEB program is to achieve at least 20% JSEB spend percentage on the available spend. If you look on the chart, that's the purple flat line across the years. This slide shows the historical trend. The green line, the top line, is the total JSEB spend percentage. The blue line shows the proportion of that was for minority and women, and the red line in the bottom shows the non-minority spend. So you can see for FY17, our total JSEB spend was almost 25%, which was at a near all-time high. The minority women spend was about 16%, and the non-MBE, the non-minority spend, was about 9%. We've been tracking it this way because we want to make sure that with a race and gender neutral program and the addition of non-minority companies, it's actually good for the program. We add more companies, we add more spend, but we keep our eye on it just to make sure that we maintain the appropriate spend levels across all the race and gender categories. And so you can see that it's important that we grow that overall spend greater than the 20% to make sure that we can get the minority spend at the levels it's been in the past. This slide shows some of our FY17 highlights. As I mentioned earlier, the spend percentage is at a near all-time high for us. The items in the circles on this chart show year-to-year comparison from FY16 to FY17. Starting from the left, our services spend increased by 20%. Went up $1 million. We also look at the services spend. We consider this an area of non-traditional JSEB spend. So the more we can get in the services area, it helps us just grow the overall pie, and it's important.
So John, I apologize, but at your table, there's an insert of a different page for this slide. The ones in the books and the ones on their tablets had an incorrect percentage in the first circle, and it needs to be substituted with this page.
The initial one had professional services at about 45, but that was a mistake. So services spend increased by 20%, and that was in the updated handout. Thank you, Jody. The overall spend increased by $3.4 million, which was a 35% increase year to year on the overall JSEB spend. And we also track our overall non-JSEB minority spend. And that increased by $4 million over the previous year, which is over 100% increase. That was largely due to one company, though. You know about the resiliency work we've been doing on the water sewer side. A company named Sabat, Hispanic American, has been a major one of our major vendors on that work. Good story too. His Hispanic American came over from Cuba when he was younger, and he's here local, and he's doing great work for us. Approximately 55% of our JSEB spend this last year was to prime versus sub. This is something else we look at and keep good visibility on. It's important to the JSEB companies that they get prime work. And 65 companies, JSEBs, are currently performing work with us. This slide shows some of our program successes. starting from the left, Jay's been leading the city's vision since 2013, when we initiated a supplier diversity joint agency task force with all the Jacksonville agencies that has been a really successful collaborative effort that's still ongoing. This past year, Nadine Carswell, who had been our JSEB manager, retired, and and she was very good, and this actually turned into a succession planning success for us. Largely thanks to Angie and her team, we got out in front of Nadine leaving, and we brought in Rita Scott, who was a former CSX procurement manager, accounts payable, with really strong credentials, and she's hit the deck running, and we had very little turnover and change out. Also, we put JSEB program in Jenny McCullum's group, and she's providing added leadership. Jenny used to be at the city, is highly regarded throughout the city. She's done great work with us here in the procurement group, and we feel that the team's gotten stronger, even though it was really strong when we had Nadine here. All the way on the right, as part of delivering business excellence in our procurement group, we've recently reorganized around category management. And without getting into the details, it gets procurement involved earlier in the spend process to be more strategic with the spend. And it also provides us a good opportunity to provide earlier notification to the JSEB companies when spend is on the horizon that they can do. So that's going to be a nice added benefit. And at the bottom there, our senior leadership team is engaged, and it's been critical to our success. And Paul, actually, it was his idea to reach out to the other agencies in 2013 and start the agency task force that has been doing really well. So these next two slides are what I presented last year largely, and on what we were going forward. And the purpose today is just to provide you an update on what we said then and how that's going. What we said was that in 2013, after the disparity study, we were focusing in three areas. One, the Supplier Diversity Joint Agency Task Force, which I just mentioned. The second was on JEA engagement, to engage more with city stakeholders to help get the word out. And third was to focus on our major projects that were in the queue. As I mentioned earlier, the Joint Agency Task Force continues to provide a lot of value to the city. It provides one place where all of the small business programs come together that the companies can come to. We've got linked websites, jointly sponsored outreach events, quarterly newsletters that go out and show all the upcoming opportunities, and it's still providing great value. On the JSEB engagement, in 2016, we went to a couple of the city council committee meetings and gave presentations. In 2017, we followed that up with individual visits to city council members. Mike Hightower's team, Jordan Pope in particular, just did a great job coming over. Initially, some of the inquiries from city council were just questioning our program, and at the end, they've turned into advocates and have been a big help to us in getting the word out and providing positive communications to the JSEB companies. On our JSEB major project, the septic tank phase out, we talked about that we were planning for that, and that program is now underway. Biltmore C was the first septic tank phase out project. We had 358 eligible properties, and we published our engineering services RFP in March of 2017. We had strong participation goals in that, and we achieved 45% JSEB participation in that, which was $500,000 worth of work to the JSEB companies. The construction will be a much larger project, which we're planning for now, and we're looking forward to that. Look, Beverly Hills is next planned, and that engineering service RFP we're planning for May of 2018. And I've just got to say, though, I know Brian's not here, but the water wastewater team just did an outstanding job of going into that work in the engineering, breaking it up the best way it could so that we could get participation from the local community. And you can see that we just had great results on this, and this is what we plan on doing going forward. So we set strong spend goals in our solicitations. We also work really hard on outreach. A couple of examples are shown on this slide. We do a monthly workshop for our JSEB companies every month. It's toward the end of the day so that they can work and come in. That middle bullet, we really appreciate Reverend Newville inviting us out to meet with in a small business workshop. We had over 50 folks there. We fielded questions for over an hour. There was just a great interchange and understanding of what we do and what the companies were there. And now we've got a new list of companies that we can invite to future outreach events. And again, we really appreciate Board Member Newville's assistance with that. At the bottom there is an example of one of our small business workshops through the Joint Agency Task Force, which was last month. And it's just, and at these, all the agencies group together and host these events, which are usually well attended. In summary, our JSEB performance for FY17 was very strong, and we are well positioned due to the steps that we started taking back in 2013 to grow our program. The commitment of the entire JEA team, starting at the top. We mentioned Paul, our CEO, the senior leadership team, board members, and now city council representatives are really helping us and will continue to drive the success of our program going forward. That concludes my presentation, sir.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy. I appreciate that report. Any questions for Mr. McCarthy? Mr. Cumber?
Mr. McCarthy, on the opening memo before the presentation, it talks about how JEA's FY17 available spending budget was $54 million. How is that number generated?
So in the beginning of the year, we look at our total spend, and we take out items like salaries and some of the larger procurement spends on more of the technical items, like if we were going to buy a generating, not a generator, but engineered equipment where there's not any opportunity for JSEB companies, and we come down to what the available spend is. And then 20% of that is the goal.
Okay. And is there ever anyone that raises their hand and says there's something that's not in that $54 million that they would have liked to see part of that, or is that, or pretty much everybody agrees that that's the $54 million?
It's really an internal process that we do.
Okay.
And procurement does it across the businesses, and we establish that with our business partners.
And then I'm just curious because, when people think about working with government, I know we don't qualify a vendor as a JSEB. That's done by the city. Is that a pretty straightforward process, or like if someone were to wake up today and say, I want to do business with JEA, what's the time between deciding you want to pursue something with JEA and being in a position where you're approved to actually bid on something as a JSEB approved vendor?
Right. I think it's a straightforward process in that on the city's website, there's procedures to sign up. I don't know what the cycle times are. I'll have to come back to you with that. They check basic business things, licenses, that they've done work and that they're capable of doing the work. But they try to make it easy, and I hope they make it easy. And we can try to get some metrics from them on that, on terms of how long it takes.
I was just
I
curious.
don't have that off the top of my head.
I just want to echo what you said. Pastor Newell, I think it's great that you hosted that, so I commend you for doing that in the community.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. Ms. Flanagan?
If I may, through the chair, I was curious, if we do end up getting more information from the city, I'm curious how JEA compares to some of the other agencies in terms of total participation in the program, and what proportion of the total JSEB program JEA comprises.
Yeah, and so the city and JEA use the JSEB program. The other agencies use different programs largely. It depends on where their funding comes from. They use federal programs and state programs. But we meet every week, and we'll come up with what we think is the most appropriate to share with you on that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Reverend Newbill?
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. John, the other non-MBEs, what?
Those are white males.
Okay.
Small business, small and emerging.
Local, small business owners that are white male owned.
Okay. And let me thank you because the way you all carried the meeting, it was so informational. I was sitting there and actually, I learned so much from the meeting. And I think it's very important that we find a way, but I know there's a problem with getting those companies, some of those companies, to come to the monthly meeting. But I think if we look at it and try to identify other ways, maybe to get them to meetings outside of wherever that monthly meeting take place, it may be that we may be able to secure more people to those meetings. But
Well, we appreciate it,
Yeah.
and those are great opportunities for us to go out and share the program.
well, you all did a tremendous job. I want to tell you that. I was very, very pleased, and I think the majority, matter of fact, I know the majority of the people were very pleased. I'm still getting calls, but I think you need to send out a mailer that I'm not the one who set the meeting up. It's not at my place, but it's JEA.
But you fed them lunch.
Thank you, Reverend Newbill. Ms. Green?
Through the chair, just some clarity. You mentioned at the beginning, the 252 total participant, is that citywide or is that JEA?
So there are 252 certified as JSEB companies. Doesn't mean they're doing work either. That just means they're certified, city and JEA.
City and JEA. So 66 will be participating directly with JEA.
66 actually did work for us
All right.
in 17.
Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Mr. Zahn?
Through the chair, Mr. McCarthy, great work. Just curious, on the spend cumulative, what is the concentration by vendor? Is there a high concentration or is it relatively spread out?
It's not, I can get you exact numbers, and that's in our report that we do every year, the spend breakdown, both prime and sub. It's pretty much spread out because it's a small business program. There are a couple that are the larger ones.
Sure.
But none of them are over $1 million, I don't believe, in 17.
Okay. And then year over year, on the 252, do you track the net new qualified JSEP vendors? What I'm really looking for is obviously a program like this is great. A program like this that creates longevity in a company is even better. Do you track some metric that can give the board some insight as to how effective this is at actually building sustainable businesses?
Last year, we have been reporting out the number of JSEP graduates, and we had tracked it up to, I think, 10 that had graduated out of the program, because precisely they came in, built their business largely on us, and were able to grow their revenues more than $6 million a year on average, and were able to graduate out. I left that out this year, I think largely because of the new rules, and with the higher thresholds, we probably won't have folks graduating out soon with basically doubling the revenue thresholds. But I can certainly share with you the ones that have graduated out in the past. And if you're interested in 17, any new ones during 17, I can also come up with that.
Yeah, no, I think, outreach as well as coaching along the way to create a sustainable enterprise sounds like a wonderful tactics for you to employ.
We've got some companies that came to us and just built their business on us and were able to graduate out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Mr. McCarthy, this is a very important program for JEA, and I commend you and your staff. Welcome Ms. McCullough and Ms. Scott to your team, and thank you for this excellent report. Thank you. Next on the agenda, Ms. Dykes, our annual disclosure reports. Joy. The part of our agenda that subjects us all to personal liability.
Yes, I'm happy to bring personal liability and extremely heavy binders. Good afternoon.
Do we need to retrieve the binder, or are you going to address anything that's in it?
I am not going to address anything specifically that's in it as part of this presentation, and in fact, I can spare you having to retrieve it after the meeting as well. We'd be happy to transport it down to your office for you so that you don't have to carry it, unless you haven't gone to the gym today and prefer to do that. JEA is required to file with the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board our annual disclosure reports each year. Those are required to meet our continuing disclosure requirements from our banks and our bond investors. Board members have certain responsibilities with respect to these ADRs. Board members are not required to read every sentence or every page. They are, however, required to meet the requirements by the Securities and Exchange Commission, including that a public official may not authorize disclosure that the public official knows to be materially false or misleading, may not authorize disclosure while recklessly disregarding facts that indicate there is a risk that the disclosure may be misleading, and forgive me, I am going to read verbatim text from our attorneys on this. Board members are also requested to do an elephant in the room analysis. If members of the board are aware of pressing financial or operating issues, then they're responsible for knowing how those issues are disclosed to investors before authorizing bond offering or disclosure documents. There are certain steps that board members can take both to protect themselves and to ensure that our disclosure is adequate to investors. The most important of which is to ensure that staff has policies and procedures in place that govern the preparation of these disclosure documents, and that those policies and procedures have been adhered to. That policy is reviewed with the Finance and Audit Committee every year, once a year. It was reviewed with the Finance and Audit Committee at the last meeting, and there was a memo signed by me that's provided to the committee members that attests to that these procedures were adhered to in the preparation of these documents. We will be asking board members to approve these documents at the board meeting coming up next month. If there's any questions that board members have about the disclosure documents, I'm of course happy to answer questions now, or we've actually carved out some blocks of time or whenever is convenient for board members to take questions between now and the approval process next month. And that concludes the presentation of the annual reports.
Thank you, Ms. Dykes. Any questions? Mr. Cumber?
So we will approve these
In
at the next book.
I'm not going to ask you to read it now.
No, I just, and I know we haven't formally recognized a new board chair, but did you let them know it's the new board's members' requirement to read that?
And report back to those
Yes.
existing board members. I was going to bring that up.
Okay.
Book report.
Ms. Flanagan?
No questions.
Reverend Newbill? Ms. Green? Mr. Zahn? I would note, and it's in the memo that Ms. Dykes distributed as part of today's agenda, that we as board members are entitled to reasonably rely on the work of staff. The standards for that reasonable reliance are set forth in the cover memo. So in addition to reading every word of the annual disclosure report, you can rely on that, provided it meets those standards. And I will ask the question before next month's board meeting, if any directors are aware of an elephant in the room that has not been disclosed. So let's take our responsibility seriously. Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll just let board members know that we will distribute them electronically right after the board meeting, so if you don't wish to carry them home with you, you'll have them in your email right after the board meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Dykes. Don't go away. We've got your monthly operational and financial report up next.
Chair, I'm sorry, I do have one question.
Yes.
The process was very extensive. Do you take a catalog on the completion of each step within the process of staff approval, audit approval, and so on and so forth?
We do go through the procedures each year in connection with the report and verify the completion of each procedure. I don't think we do anything separately for each step.
But the verification is signator or authorized representative. How does that work?
What's
CFO signs off or audit?
Part one of the steps is a sign-off of various members of the leadership team. And so when I provide the memo to members of the Finance and Audit Committee, I'm attesting to that each of the steps has been adhered to, including that step.
Thank you, Mr. John. Sorry about that. Anything else on the annual disclosure reports? Okay, now monthly operation.
Okay. Starting with the water and wastewater monthly operations scorecard, we are running behind goal this year on safety. Our performance, has improved over last year, but safety remains our #1 priority and focus, and will remain our focus through the end of the year, hoping to improve toward our goal for the year. With respect to sales, unplanned outages, CUP compliance, and SSOs, all of those metrics are on track for this year. Nitrogen to the river is running behind goal for the year. We are expected to improve performance through the balance of the year, and there aren't any issues with respect to permit compliance. But we're running behind specifically as a result of 2 construction projects. One is repairs at Buckman that were damaged as a result of the hurricane, and the other one is a construction project at Arlington East. In the electric system and the operation scorecards, most of the metrics are on track for this fiscal year, with the exception of 2. There's electric outage duration, which is our SAFE metric. That's running behind primarily because of weather-related causes, although, it's a SAIDI metric. This program Mike Bross talked about in January with the board, and it's a focus of capital investments over the next several years to make significant improvements in outage duration. We have made improvements in number of outages by going after specifically the CME5 metric over the past number of years, and now we're shifting to adding things to the system that will help with outage duration as well. Under the generating plant performance, our generating fleet reliability is running a little bit behind our goal for this year. That's primarily due to issues that popped up in October, and the fleet has been performing very well since then. In customer experience, all of our metrics are on track for the year, with the exception of first contract resolution. That's been discussed with the board at a prior board meeting, and that's really running behind because of staffing issues. And so as we make steps to improve the staffing situation, that metric is expected to improve as well. And in the financial results and cost metrics, we have 2 metrics that are flagged in yellow for the year, both of them cost related. On the electric side, our non-fuel dollars per megawatt hour is running a little bit behind goal for this year, primarily due to an insurance payment that came due last month and was larger than expected because of premium increases because of the storms that we've had, as well as some increase in coverage on the electric side. In the water system, our water cost per kgal is also running behind goal. That's a shift since last month, primarily due to capital spend. We've got some projects that are going to be delivered maybe a little sooner than were expected last month. And so our capital forecast for the year went up from $220 million up to $231 million. We do think it's possible that's going to normalize back to around $220 for the year, so I'm not concerned yet about our ability to meet that cost goal for the year. Any questions about the scorecard?
Mr. Cumber.
Just 2 quick questions through the chair. Melissa, on the nitrogen to the river that you have red at 297 tons, I noted in the, below that we have a limit of 683. We give COJ 37, so if my math is right, that's 646 tons that we have. Just for clarity, that red is really against the target, not that we think we're going to get anywhere close to the 646 limit.
That's exactly right. We set a goal that's substantially under our permit limit for nitrogen. And so our goal, it may be in jeopardy, but our permit limit will certainly not.
Okay. And then on the safety, if I look at waste and wastewater and electric, it's almost the same numbers. Well, they are the same numbers across 2, 1.4, and 1.52. But under water and wastewater, you have a red and you have yellow. Is red because we see a trend happening at water and wastewater that we need to be concerned about?
I could make a joke about Mike versus Brian perceiving the numbers differently. In fact, the recordable incident rate is calculated across the whole organization. It's not separated by water and electric.
Okay.
And so I think that was just a clerical error.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Flanagan.
Mr. Cumber caught my question.
Reverend Newville. Ms. Green. Mr. Zahn. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dykes. I appreciate that. We come to the point of our agenda where we've got open discussion. I was remiss in not recognizing our new board member at the outset of this meeting. We welcome Aaron Zahn. Aaron brings a distinguished business record and a lot of experience, primarily on the wastewater side from his prior company. And it's an honor and a privilege to serve the citizens of Jacksonville and the ratepayers, but it's occasionally thankless. So let me just start by saying thank you for giving of your time, and to your wife and family for giving of their time. I don't know if I said that to you, Ms. Green. Thank you. They told you it was unpaid, right? Okay. So this is open discussion. We have an opportunity to discuss amongst ourselves items that have not come before the board previously. We won't discuss privatization now. We've got a workshop immediately following this board meeting where we'll discuss that topic. But with that, I will open the floor for any other items of discussion among the board. Mr. Zahn, new to the table?
None at this time.
Ms. Green?
No.
Reverend Newbill? Ms. Flanagan? Mr. Cumber?
I don't know if this falls under old business, or I'll just bring it up in the open discussion, but I think we're 6 months into the fiscal year, and I know Mr. McElroy had brought a contract with you in January. We were going to send that back to the comp committee. I recognize there are other conversations happening around us. But in fairness to Mr. McElroy, given the fact that we're halfway through the year, we had said to him that, either we're going to set some bonus targets for him so he knows what he needs to achieve at the end of the year. I think the contract that had come up actually took this current year and wrapped it into 2 extra years. And so I think we owe our CEO some clarity on what the board is thinking, and, and if anything new has kind of popped up in Mr. McElroy's mind. But, given that the soonest that we could have this is an April discussion, I would just kind of throw it out and kind of say we probably owe a discussion on comp and try to bring that in for a landing for Paul, just so we don't get squeezed with the current year with bonus targets, and as we get closer to September, obviously we don't want to do anything with pressure on us.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. It's a point well taken. I'll ask Mr. McElroy and his assistant, Ms. Charleroy, to coordinate a compensation committee meeting so we can bring that report before April.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Flanagan, anything? Anyone else? Then we're on to other new business. Old business. Flying right along. Okay, up to Roman numeral 4, agenda item reports, Finance and Audit Committee report. Ms. Flanagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We convened a meeting of the Finance and Audit Committee last week on March 12th. Topics that were addressed by the committee included review of the fiscal year 19 budget assumptions, the annual disclosure policy, which was just reviewed by Ms. Dykes, a presentation on dark fiber utility services, quarterly audit services update, an ethics officer quarterly update, reports from Treasury on the quarterly fund report, as well as a recap of debt refunding on the delegated transactions, as well as the JEA Energy Market Risk Management Policy Report. And I'm going to invite Mr. Cosgrave to assist in a recap of the dark fiber utility services for the board, as there is an action item requested. But before we convene on that, I really wanted to commend management with specifically the finance department's assistance around the Treasury transactions. And I think it's especially important to highlight to the rest of our board the incredible contributions that were made around the debt refunding program last year. Finance and Audit Committee were happy to receive the final results totaling of about $68.6 million in net present value savings that was generated through the water and electric system debt refunding. So just want to commend their efforts. It was done on a very short timetable, and a lot of time and effort went into that from our staff.
I echo those remarks. Welcome to the table, Mr. Cosgrave, but thank you, Ms. Flanagan, for pointing that out. Ms. Dykes, I don't know if Joe and Ryan are there. Great job by you and the entire team, saving our ratepayers $68 million, working a lot of long hours in December. So thank you very much. Stole your thunder, Mr. Cosgrave.
No problem.
Go ahead.
This is a presentation that I gave at the F&A committee. I'll try to go through it quickly, but there's a fair amount of background information that I think is helpful for the whole board to understand. So it's a presentation about a discussion about possible new growth area for JEA called Dark Fiber Utility Services. And I'll just give you a little background. with the growth of broadband telecommunications over the last 30 years or so, that gave JEA an opportunity to take advantage of it, and the way we did was we leased out underutilized assets. We currently lease out space on over 30 cell towers that we own across the city. We lease out space on over 200,000 electric and streetlight poles that we own, which are the vast majority of poles actually that are in Jacksonville. And we lease out some underground conduit in downtown and allow communications carriers to ride on some of these, on some of the unused fibers that we have as part of our dark fiber. We have 550 miles of dark fiber, so it's a pretty good asset as well that we can lease out. So altogether, this produces about $9 million in annual revenue from the leasing out, with about 1.7 to 1.9 of it directly from the dark fiber. But the problem is we're constantly asked by the other entities in town here if we can lease out additional fiber cable. However, most of these requests involve requiring us to lay additional fiber. And we're unable to do that because our charter restricts us as to only using our funds to invest in projects that are directly supportive of our own business. So we need to walk away from a number of these opportunities, and they would be both fairly profitable to us with a very good, healthy return on investment, as well as generally good for the community. So I'll give you some examples. We've been asked by organizations, many of them city agencies such as JTA, JSO, JEA, or even the city itself, to provide these kinds of services. And we've been asked by various community organizations, health organizations, education, other community not-for-profits, and they've all approached us about this, and we've had to turn down those opportunities. So what we're asking to be able to do is, in addition to continue leasing out the unutilized assets that we're currently able to lease out, we're seeking the required legislative change from the City Council to expand our current offerings by permitting us to make prudent investments that would be needed to allow some of these government and community-oriented organizations to leverage the existing asset of 550 miles of dark fiber that we own. This would benefit the community by allowing JEA to support programs such as the Smart City initiatives that JTA is currently behind, programs that JSO is trying to do in terms of various aspects around the city, and then other city agencies, as well as supporting some of the remote educational type of networks that the universities are trying to put in place, as well as health institutes. This offering really works well for essentially helping these companies reduce their telecommunications costs, and it also works well if they have multiple campuses around the city. So as this chart shows, it's a little hard to read there, but you've got copies as well in the book. From a financial projection, we believe we can easily grow this business by at least 50% over the next few years, with a very small growth in associated operating and maintenance costs. The operating margins of this are quite high, as you can see from this chart. And furthermore, because the contracts in this business are minimally at least 5 years in duration, they can give you a very steady growth rate and steady revenue flow. So this chart's a very conservative estimate of how we might grow the business. And I think with some aggressive marketing, I'm sure we can even grow it faster, although frankly, we're limited in the amount of capital we can expand on this business because we're not eligible to use any bond funding. So today I only have one person involved in this, and he produces all that $9 million of revenue, so clearly there's opportunity to expand this. This page here on 5 gives you an example of a particular project we're discussing with the city. In fact, it's being discussed there today. We can support over 150 of their locations across the county with an investment that's less than $600,000. Actually, our latest estimate has it more around $400,000, and it would produce a major cost savings for the city. And so while we've discussed this with the city, discussions have not gone very far yet due to these funding limitations that I previously mentioned. The investment will also produce a reasonable return for us, and it clearly benefits the taxpayers of Duval County by helping reduce the city's telecom costs. This program, if we go forward with it, would have a strict governance oversight, as each investment would need to ensure an adequate return on investment for JEA, and that would require the approval of the Chief Financial Officer. And because the service is already producing a positive cash flow, the business would be funded from ongoing cash generated from the existing contracts and thus not requiring any further leverage on JEA's business. We report back to the board regularly on the progress of how we would do with the dark fiber leasing business, and will seek a reauthorization of the business after an initial 3-year incubation period. And because of the limits in the current charter, we're asking for approval from the full board and then eventually the city council. It's our recommendation that along with our budget this year, we submit this request that's in your packet to the city council in the form of this attached resolution, which is 2018-01.JEA. And then finally, I want to make it clear what we're not doing, because this gets into some pretty important issues. We're not becoming a telecommunications provider. Our proposed services are limited to leasing out dark fiber, which in fact requires the customer to light the fiber for use in their communications network, and thus we're not a telecommunications provider. Other municipalities have actually gone much further and have actually become local exchange carriers, and even in some cases to provide fiber to the home and even offer on cable TV services. It's not our intent to do that at all. We're simply wanting to lease underutilized dark fiber to organizations who are essentially interested in better serving our community. So that's the proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Cosgrave. We've got a proposed resolution. I'll ask for a motion to adopt the resolution, then open this up for discussion. Is there a motion? Thank you, Revenue Bill. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Flanagan. So discussion, questions to Mr. Cosgrave. Mr. Cumber.
Really just a follow-up for the Finance and Audit meeting. We talked about engaging City Council before this officially got transmitted. I just wanted to make sure that that was still part of the strategy.
Absolutely.
So
We're
define
having discussions today. There's discussions about this today with the CFO at the city, and then we'll get next to the City Council.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Flanagan.
I don't have any further questions. Thank you, Mr. Cosgrave, for your assistance in the presentation. It did receive the unanimous support of the Finance and Audit Committee, which we bring today to the full board.
Thank you very much. Reverend Newbill.
Under the current charter, is there an opportunity for a public-private partnership, or is that even in the scheme of things?
We'll let the person next to you answer that question.
Right, this would be categorized as other utility services. In our charter, we have the ability to do electric and water and sewer as our graced powers under the charter. And we can utilize the dark fiber program that we currently have, utilize assets that we already have in the ground or have already spent capital on, that were part of the utility system as a whole. So if it's ancillary or incidental to our already core businesses, it's okay. But if it goes beyond that, but there's no ability from a public-private partnership. There are provisions in the charter, but it's somewhat this is somewhat of a unique situation.
What we would do, though, is, let's say we get a new project to work on here, we would engage contract firms, in some cases the JSEB firms, to help us build these services out. So they're in that sense, it's not a true public-private partnership, but we would in fact engage local businesses.
Thank you. That answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Green?
Through the chair, in the same vein, the charter keeps us from switching over to telecommunications as well, becoming a provider as well.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. And
That's not one of the graced
There's
powers,
state
yeah.
rules there, too, that we have to adhere to.
Mr. Zahn?
Yeah, so, by the way, Mr. Cosgrove, I commend you on being able to generate $9 million of revenue with one person.
One person.
But, you know, knowing a little bit about the space, I'm going to have a couple different questions. I did get a chance to talk with Mr. McElroy about this, and my understanding that, and this is a philosophical question, the thing that struck me when I read this section was that we're talking about a $2 billion company entering a new market and trying to generate roughly $3 million in revenue over a 5-year period of time, which, you know, knowing this market that grows at 20 to 25 times per year and has a significant tailwind just struck me as kind of a small growth target. To that end, I wonder if the board, you know, so I'm supportive of the initiative, just to be clear, and I'm supportive of your continued efforts and your team's continued efforts on this. I just wonder whether or not, you know, we look at a philosophical difference of an existing business, which this currently is because you're generating revenues, And offset, and in my discussion with Mr. McElroy, he looks at this as an offset to ever increasing utility expenses on the other parts of our business. I just wonder if there's something larger here that can offer a greater community advantage. For example, smart city initiative around 5G and the rollout there and the amount of density that's going to be required given the wavelength that needs to be distributed. The emergency systems that need to be deployed and that oftentimes are needed in the times of hurricane and can be utilized in terms of fiber systems. So I look at this and I start to ask specific questions. There's a mention of internal rate of return targets. I don't know what that is. I'm not asking you to answer the question. I just would hope that perhaps maybe we sit down and talk through things like what is going to be the scope of services provided by JEA, dark versus lit versus financing. There's a lot in this industry, as you know, there's a lot of turnkey delivery of systems where you're not in fact a lit provider, but you're delivering the equipment, financing it on the benefit of wireless, which I actually noticed was not in kind of the description. A lot of this was just wireline people and not wireless, which are clamoring for this type of dark fiber asset. The other thing is really what does the map look like in terms of our existing 550 miles? Do we have, an extra 30 strands, or are we talking 1,000 strands? What is the bandwidth? Because that would then also, look into how much we can expand on this. As you can see, I have a litany of questions. Most of them, and I'm not going to continue to belabor it. I'll bring it back succinctly to if a company is going to enter a business, and we should have a fundamentally sound philosophical debate as a board that gives you and the management team the appropriate wherewithal in terms of capital expenditures to truly grow a business and provide the value to the community, as well as to our ratepayers, as well as to the potential commercial partners that you might employ, and give you the right resources. Just when I read it, I'm underwhelmed at what this says, but my guess is that you're doing it in a way in order to maybe not ruffle feathers, whereas I'd like to see, and that may be where we fall, but it'd be nice to be able to say we could have had a business that looked like this, which could support a $115 million, contribution to the general fund, as well as a number of other things,
Sure.
if but for having policy initiatives that are preventing it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good, some of those issues I'd like to meet with you prior, maybe one-on-one and explain some of the details. But overall, we're limited in terms of not using any bond funding here. So that's one constraint. The second issue that we're being, first of all, let me just mention on the 5G, because you mentioned that, we have a whole nother program that I didn't want to get into today, where we're working with the carriers on 5G in terms of putting them on our poles and stuff. We've got over 100 permits that we're processing right now for 5G expansion. So that is happening. It's part of the 9 million, not the 1.9 million. So I didn't want to get into that today, but that's going on as well at the same time. We've got to be a little careful, this sort of baby step, in the sense that there will be some, could potentially be some issues at the council in terms of some people out there thinking we're getting into their business, and we just got to be a little careful about that. So I thought at this point, and Paul and I have talked about this, probably, a baby step's a good first start here.
Yeah, and thanks, Paul. And I think the way to characterize it, quite frankly, is we've looked at the opportunity to leverage idle assets, or some call them lazy assets, if you will, or under capacity that's already in the system, that we've got investment, that if we can generate a revenue stream on top of what we're doing, then that's sort of a way to help defray the cost of rising O&M expenses throughout the system. The significant step forward to going into a new business, Paul rightfully points out constraints that we've run into. We're a municipal, so there are some funding issues. Those can be solved and have been solved in the past. They've not been receptive in the past at City Council. They've not been receptive by past administrations. It also puts us in a competitive landscape on some areas. Even when we've done the public-private partnerships, we've had very significant challenges in the past of trying to make progress on that. I think there's tremendous opportunity there, in terms of certainly this space, and let alone the revenue of the utility. The positive and constructive impact on business development and growth in our community into the 21st century, into smart cities and broadband throughout loops throughout the city, throughout the county, and certainly into some of the underserved areas, would have a tremendous lift. And it has been a major frustration. I know Paul has experience in this, has run this part of the business for Mayor Bloomberg in New York City, so the capability and the capacity is here. We're underutilizing the assets, and as a community, we're underutilizing the human assets that we have on our team to sort of help us step forward. So anything we can do as a board in terms of supporting our efforts to try to drive forward on some of this and improve really the quality of life would be helpful.
Thank you, Paul. And Paul. Mr. Bember, follow up?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. So through the chair, I agree with everything you said, board members on. I think part of the reason I had asked Paul as to whether or not we're, proactively reaching out to council is last time we tried to go into a new business, the potential competitors defined the landscape instead of JEA, and so we ended up not really being able to leg into that business. I think this is a conservative way to get into this business, recognizing that I think if we define the potential opportunity for JEA with our stakeholders across the street, this has the potential to grow. But up to now, why I was very happy to see Paul come back with this is people have not viewed JEA as an entity to come and knock on the door of and say, you've got dark fiber assets, how do we leverage that? And I think, with this vote that we will take, if it passes, we're basically telling the private sector that, we can be a partner with you because we have these assets. Once you get into the room with those potential partners, who knows where the conversation goes. But I am also very cognizant of the fact that there are a lot of companies in this space. I don't think we're equipped at JEA to underwrite every potential counterparty that's going to be coming in through the door. And so we also just have to recognize the fact that if there's a good way to leg into this, get revenue, and then see where the industry takes us, this is a good first start. Whereas if we come out with a full plan, my fear is there may be a lot of pushback on that.
Thank you. Anything else?
No, I'll just, one last point to wrap up. I do agree with your point in terms of, I'm not asking to change this plan. I think it's a good starting point. I just think that if we were to present the plan that could be the alternative, if policy was a bit different, it might be an eye-opening set of data points for other people to read and get a view on really what we could deliver, especially since we're sitting on a 550-mile metro ring that I'm not going to quote what those things are traded for on a per mile basis, but it's very large numbers. So that tells us how valuable of an asset we currently have, and if we're already out there digging ditches for water mains and other T&D assets, and we could be using our CapEx more efficiently, that's another advantage that we so I agree, there is a touchy place on how do you partner appropriately with competitors and maybe not be viewed as a competitor, but just are providing a backbone for them to continue to provide better services for our city. But it would be interesting to be able to lay that out, even if you're not going to change the plan.
Point well taken. Anything else before we move to a vote? I will say that I appreciate the report. I expressed my support for it in the Finance and Audit Committee meeting. I support it here. I think that this is a logical expansion to leverage those assets already in the ground for a significant return. I hear what you're saying, Director Zahn. Let's not aim too low. There's a lot of upside to utilizing this asset and expanding it, including to services to our sister city entities, JSO, JTA, and COJ itself, which ironically knocking on our door asking for help, and we can't help them. So this would address that issue. Any other discussion before we move to a vote? All in favor of Resolution 2018-01-JEA, say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Cosgrave. Ms. Flanagan, anything else from Finance and Audit?
That concludes our report.
Thank you. I would note that in the course of the Finance and Audit Committee meeting, Ms. Flanagan asked the question during the course of the presentation on our risk management policy, what, if anything, JEA is doing to address the risk and issues that have been heightened by developments in our society most recently, and known as the Me Too movement, or No More movement. And we received an update on programs that have been developed by JEA's HR department that are being implemented system-wide to heighten education and awareness of those issues. So I didn't want to let the Finance and Audit Committee meeting report go by without noting that. Any other questions of Ms. Flanagan on Finance and Audit? If not, we'll move to the Nominating Committee report. The Nominating Committee met recently, attended by Director Cumber, Director Flanagan, Director Newbill, and myself. I'm pleased to say that, I'm not sure if I'm pleased to say, I'll report that the slate of officers nominated for the board's consideration for JEA board were myself as chair, Mr. Cumber as vice chair, and Reverend Newbill as secretary. Is there a motion to approve that slate of officers?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Flanagan. Second by Reverend Newbill. Any discussion on the motion? That was my last chance to get out.
And think of a better leader.
Thanks. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Okay, motion carries. Mr. McElroy, I think it's to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. We're running a little late. I have one point of clarity. We had some conversation early on with the public comment on solar, and just to remind, I think the board and really the community, at the time we did that metering, we talked about our universal solar and expansion. We've made great progress in terms of securing the land to expand our universal or utility scale solar. We have received bids from the marketplace, and so we are clearly on the path to moving to approximately 250 megawatts of solar capacity. When we talk about net metering, after 3 or 4 years now, and recognize it's going to be smaller in scale anyway, it's going to end up at about 10 to 12 megawatts. So we're talking about going to 250 megawatts on top of the 50 that we already have. 300 megawatts within our service territory will place Jacksonville on the map as being the city with the highest concentration of solar generating assets within its service territory in the country, not the state, not the region, but in the country. And so I'm not sure how much bigger a commitment we can get at this time, but it seems like we're sort of missing the mark in terms of our communication on how large a commitment for solar and changing our generating profile. At the same time, we had a historic closing of the SGRPP power plant and a commitment again to reduction of CO2 from our power generation. And that's 600 megawatts for JEA, 600 megawatts for FPL. A terrific and significant reduction in CO2 and commitment to the environment. So we are committed. I would say that we have been pleasantly surprised at terms and conditions and some of the initial price offering. So we'll be able to achieve our goals and objectives in terms of utility scale solar, and look forward to sharing more details with the board.
Thank you, Mr. McElroy. I appreciate that. Very limited chair's report. We will adjourn this meeting momentarily, and we'll immediately go into workshop. If anyone needs to make themselves scarce for the facilities, please feel free to do so. But I want to keep this moving forward straight into workshop. For the media members in attendance, Mr. McElroy and I will be available to the media following the conclusion of our workshop. And I'd also note that at Mr. McElroy's direction, our communications department is making available through the JEA website all of the information provided to the City Council's Special Committee on JEA. So all of that information is available to members of the public, beginning with the materials that were available for presentation at last Thursday's meeting. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Anything else before we adjourn the board meeting formally? All right. Board meeting's adjourned.